I was sitting in the woods the other day and I was writing a film script. I was just somewhat inspired sitting there in the woods listening to all the bird song around me. And I thought, let's do something that is completely unusual and would never happen. Would never happen. So this is all just, complete rubbish. Just made it up as if I had been given a Hollywood film script. You know how Hollywood likes to make films and they sort of predict what's going to happen, and then almost a week or so later, after it's been out and people have watched the film, it happens in real life. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if I could write a film script in which it was, in a way, predicting something which was so preposterous it couldn't possibly happen, and then it sort of happened. So I was sitting in there listening to the birds, and I had a scrap of paper and I was writing away, and I thought, I know what I'll do. I will create a world crisis. Yes, I will have some arch enemies, and they'd sort of like some weird, nasty, top-down government. Bunch of people who were very fed up with the people, the large population of the world, and thought, do you know what? Wouldn't it be nice if we had the world all to ourselves and we could just get shot of all these useless eaters? So that was it. I would have all these nasty characters. One of them would dress a bit like a Bond villain, stroking his cat and all that nonsense. And they would come up with this idea that in order to get shot of all these useless people, they would do a little bit of research on some disease that they could spread across the world. Now, I know that's not a unique idea, but what was quite clever, I thought, in this unique proposition was that they would make it seem as if it was one thing, but it was something else. So they went around. And I was inspired because I saw an earthworm sitting in a UK woods, and I thought, you don't see very many snakes, do you? And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if you could find a poisonous snake, like a cobra or something like that, and you get another poisonous snake and extract all the venom from them, and then sort of mix it up, put it into some form of aerosol, and then, make sure it becomes a really nasty virus, and then it's released from a lab on one part of the world and is spread everywhere, and people sort of get it and they get very ill and they find it, they can't breathe very well, and there's a lot of fear going on. I thought, well, that would be quite good. And then, of course, you'd have the response to it, the McNasties on their evil little island or wherever it was they met, meeting each other in private jets. They'd already worked out, actually, that's the problem and we'll have the solution. And the solution was more of this snake venom stuff, this really nasty stuff, which they would put into these syringes. And then, again, with a lot more peer pressure and mainstream media, in my plot, you understand, completely made up, they would force people to take these inoculations, and so a mass number of people would have this snake venom in them. And of course there was an antidote that nobody really knew or spoke about, which was nicotine. In fact, it was the stuff that people smoked, although people were being encouraged not to smoke because actually that would save them from it. So more and more people were getting ill. Anyway, they had these injections, and I thought in my film script, which is all made up, of course, and it's all nonsense, you understand. There's no truth in it whatsoever. Then people would be dropping down as a result of having had these inoculations that they'd been mandated into having, and everybody had been frantic and panicky all about it. And then after a while, people were sort of concerned about it. They'd stand up, I don't know, in parliaments and places like that and say, oi, I think there's a problem with these so-called medical rescue packs, let's call them, in my film idea. But nobody would take notice. Only a few people, perhaps, I don't know, 10 or 20% of the population of the world started to sort of wake up to this. But the vast majority were saying, oh no, don't be silly, there's no problem. I'm going to go and have a special booster version of this medical pack. And so they would do that. And yet more people would drop down, especially in their families and things like that. And the McNasties sitting on their island are sort of rubbing their hands going, it's good, but it's not good enough. What we really need in order to get rid of most of these people in a quicker time, what we need is another sort of scare, another made up imaginary scare with some McNasty chemicals. So they got more of this this snake stuff, which they had tons of it. And they started to ship it around the world and put it into warehouses they'd call it medicine. Of course, it would be, again, connected with a syringe that would have to be injected into the body. In my film, you do understand it is just a film. It's just made up. It's not real. It bears no relationship to anything that's happening in the real world, just so that you know that. And so all around, particularly in the Western world, but other parts of the world, there would be huge stores, great big crates, and pilots would be thinking, it's funny, we're shipping around this sort of medicine, and the medicine would be for well, what would it be? And I was looking up in the canopy of the trees, and I saw the birds going around. And I thought, I know, yes, so it'll be like birds. Imagine the birds all got ill, like, they do, don't they, rapidly, and they all just drop to the ground, don't they, birds? It's a natural thing. They just suddenly get like that, and down they go. And I thought, yes, that'll be what it'll be. And I thought, there'll be this sort of ruse that the McNasties in their little island will pretend that it's possible to transfer this fake illness to humans. And they'll make out, oh yes, birds are falling out the sky, they're dropping dead and in their droves all over the place, in woodlands and places. And so, of course, in order to stop people actually going to have a look at these places, they'll shut them all down and they'll say, you better stay indoors because this is a terrible thing. It's going across the world and you better not go out into the countryside. Don't go into the woodland. It can pass through ticks or through sheep or bears or lizards or even snakes, funnily enough. Yeah, it's horrible if you got a snake bite that was extrally filled up with this snake venom. But anyway, that's another thing. And so, of course, in order to do that, they'd have a few cases. People were, oh golly, I'm not feeling very. Oh yes, you must have got it, bird. Oh yes, the flu from the bird. It's got you, and it's passing now. And of course, the news stories, the papers, and various commentators on places like YouTube and others, people that you respected and people that you thought were on your side, that were actually shills. And some of them were, what would they call them? The controlled opposition. They'd been bribed so much money. They were, you thought that there was no way that they would be against you, but they too were sort of inviting you to, have another, what. And so the outcomes, all this medicine that's already been prepared and had been so-called tested and was safe and effective, of course, in my story, my own made-up story that has no bearing whatsoever on real life, of course. And this time it would be, they would say things like, oh yes, this evil thing from the birds is targeting the children. Oh, because in the last disease, in the last sort of pandemic of all of that, the children were sort of saved because it didn't really affect them. So this time they want to get the children because they don't want the next generation. They don't want kids to come up and if the kids didn't die, then they would just sterilise them so they couldn't have kids. And it was a great way, I thought, in my story, in my script, in my plot that I made up, it would be a great way that my McNasties could, of course, control the world population by sterilising the kids or just killing them or making them go mentally mad and things like that. And so when this pandemic, this new disease that would come around the world in my story, I would make sure that, again, more mandates and more masks and more shutting people down and more of these injections, but in the children, you see, so there was no hope for humanity, and the evils are rubbing their hands with glee, going, oh, we've got it this time, we will certainly wipe them all out. What they hadn't thought about in my story, of course, is that people had begun to wake up. And in my story, there was a sort of a great rising of people who were sort of going, hang on a minute, this sounds incredibly suspicious. I'm not sure I'm going to fall for it this time. I am going to get out into the countryside. I'm going to prove, and in fact, I'm going to take back the responsibility for my own health by not going to these big medical places, these doctors and these nurses and these big institutions that are telling us that we should have this special treatment. We're actually going to eat more healthily. We're going to get our own immunity up to it. We're going to possibly make sure we've got a few nicotine tablets in the cupboard, just in case there is any sort of truth in the fact that these different poisons from these reptiles were actually integrated into some medical thing, or aerosoled in the sky, just to be on the safe side. But mostly we're going to make these big authority figures irrelevant. We're not going to listen to them. We're not going to take part in it. We're all going to get that back into a grassroots environment and rise up and say no. It's peaceful. We'd be very peaceful in my story, in the film that I'm writing, be very peaceful. And they just say no, bog off. Not going to do it. On your bike, mate. Clear off. Not having any of this nonsense. You've tried to scare us once before. We're not going to be scared no more. In fact, you should be scared of us, because at the end of the day, there is more of us than there are of you. And we are waking up in a big mass, in a big rising. Not a violent rising with baseball bats and pitchforks, but we are going to hold our corner, thank you very much. And we're just going to say, no, we're not doing any of this. We're going to eat healthily. We're going to move away from all of that. We're ditching our televisions, and we're ditching all the stuff in which you can tell us and dictate to us. And we, the people, are going to make our own minds up and do our own thing. Thank you very much. We don't want any of your nonsense. And I thought that would be an interesting story, just for a film, you know, to sort of warn people what McNasty people on different parts of the world do plan and put together. But of course, it's just a story, isn't it? I mean, it would never really happen. None of this is actual, factual in any shape or form. And I don't claim that it is. But sometimes allegories, storytelling, narratives do help people to understand what could be on the cards. And things like the birds, you know, dropping from the sky, passing on horrible things. I mean, it's unlikely, really. I mean, we've been around, have we not, as a human species for so long. You would think that we would have been wiped out many, many years ago by such so-called natural things, if that was a real thing. So if you were told, for example, that some sort of bird flu was passing to humans, you'd start to think, that sounds suspicious. Maybe that's been manufactured. Maybe that has been deliberately so. And actually there is a body of people who really don't like us and want to wipe us out. And then you would, in fact, push back and just simply say no.